was Charles Darwin?
Charles Darwin was an English naturalist who was fascinated with nature.
But not an ordinary naturalist, with an ordinary fascination with nature.
Hello. What are you doing here?
Why such beauty when no one can see?
In 1831, Charles Darwin was only 22 when he began a 5-year voyage aboard the British ship HMS Beagle to explore, observe, and study the natural world. The Beagle sailed throughout South America and to remote places like the Galapagos Islands off Ecuador. Darwin later wrote that he felt like a blind man being given sight. He returned to England with his mind and notebooks full of fantastic images.
What a brilliant red.
Nothing seemed too insignificant for his scrutiny.
He kept detailed records of what he saw during his voyage on the Beagle. He collected fossils. He kept detailed recordings of plants and animals. He drew them. He observed them.
Little did Darwin realize that his years on the Beagle would begin a lifetime of hard work and controversy.
The greatest scientists of Darwin's day referred to the appearance of species originally as the mystery of mysteries. Now, Darwin was an ambitious young man, and he decided to tackle this greatest mystery in the biology of his day.
Darwin took on the task of unraveling this mystery methodically, with patience and care. Gradually, one simple and elegant idea became more and more clear to him, that all living things are related. It was a conclusion that to Darwin could not be escaped. But he also knew he was in dangerous waters. He rarely shared his thoughts with others, but his brother was an exception.
The similarity of structure indicates one thing and one thing only. An ancient common ancestor. Real flesh and blood parents.
Why didn't you say so then? You must publish your ideas, if only to establish your priority. What's holding you back?
You have to understand that Darwin was a respectable man. His father was a well-known physician. He came from a well-known family. He went to Cambridge University to train for the Church of England, and he knew eminent scientists of his day.
In Darwin's time, the prevailing explanation for the great diversity of life was a literal interpretation of the Earth's creation as described in Genesis, the first book of the Bible.
Established naturalists believed that God created each individual species of animals and plants, usually miraculously, at the beginning, and that these species had stayed fixed.
We allow the planets and the sun to be governed by natural laws. But the smallest insect we wish to be created by a special act of God. Surely the creation of life has to be explained in the same way as geology, using natural, ordinary, everyday causes.
Well, in theory, yes, but in practice there can be no question about the prime cause. Divine will.
Shouldn't men of science be free to investigate each and every means by which new species come into being?
If by that you mean wild accusations about man's ancestry, the answer is no.
He was doing something highly unorthodox in his day. Not unorthodox because it went against the church per se, but because it went against all of natural history in Great Britain. He knew he stood to jeopardize the whole united establishment of science, politics, and the church. He knew that he could get into very, very bad trouble and ruin his career.
And yet Darwin also knew the evidence he gathered and the tests he conducted supported the revolutionary idea that living things are related and have changed over millions and millions of years. This new way of thinking was a mark of his genius. It took Darwin 23 years of work to overcome his own doubts to finally present his ideas to the world. His revolutionary book, The Origin of Species, introduced a scientific theory to explain how evolution occurs. He called his mechanism of change natural selection.
Darwin had the courage to go against what was believed in those days, and it changed the world in a profound way.
One of the remarkable things about Darwin's contribution that is, I think, too seldom appreciated is he didn't just tell us how we got here. He told us, in a sense, why biology makes sense. The sequences of our genes, the structures of our body, and even our instincts in terms of behavior all make sense and all tie together because of evolution.
If I were to give a prize for the single best idea anybody ever had, I'd give it to Darwin for the idea of natural selection. Ahead of Newton, ahead of Einstein, it was Darwin's great stroke to see how to unite the facts about the excellence of design of all the different species. He understood that what he was proposing was a truly revolutionary idea.
In Westminster Abbey, there's an area called Scientists' Corner. There, in the company of that other revolutionary scientific thinker, Sir Isaac Newton, lies Charles Darwin. How do we know evolution happens?
Fossils provide the most interesting evidence for evolution, and certainly the most powerful for most people.
I want you to look behind us.
There's an abundance of hard evidence at the molecular, chemical, and anatomical level that evolution happens. But perhaps it's the clues hardened in stone that tell evolution's story most vividly.
Here are the backbones. You can see how big these vertebrae are. The history of life is all a record in fossils, millions of them, from strata, layer by layer by layer back through time, are all interconnected. Now, partly this layering and succession is how we tell time in geology, but it's also the principal evidence that life has changed through time, that life has evolved through time, that the things living today can all be connected back through time to common ancestors.
These now lifeless dry rocks are gold to paleontologists. They are the puzzle pieces to the origin of one of the most powerful and majestic animals on Earth, the whale.
The evolution of whales has always been sort of a mystery. They're like us in that they're very intelligent. They're mammals. They're warm-blooded. They nurse young and feed them milk. But they're very, very different. I mean, they live in water. They can hear in water. And they swim around like fish. So the question is this. We know that mammals originally evolved on land, yet whales live in the water. How did that shift, how did that evolution happen from life on land to life in the water?
That question consumes paleontologist Phil Gingrich. The evolution of whales has been his passion ever since 1978, when his team unearthed a rock in Pakistan that appeared to have a skull embedded in it.
When we found it, all you could see was the brain case. Well, I thought it was a wolf-like animal with a very small brain. When it was cleaned, the ears were uncovered, and I could see that it had a very characteristic whale ear, and that shows us that what we have is a whale, not a wolf, not a deer, not some other kind of mammal, but a fossil whale.
Gingrich named the whale ancestor Pakicetus. With only its skull as evidence, scientists do not know for sure what the rest of Pakicetus looked like. But some scientists hypothesize that it resembled a modern seal.
Okay, look at this, Bill. Here's this.
Paleontologists look for fossils that have transitional features from one way of life to another. They use these related forms to create a comprehensive picture of evolutionary change. When fossils of related species are located, scientists organize them by their physical similarities. Sometimes these similarities don't evolve all at once, like the whale ear of Pakicetus, which lacks many other whale-like features in its backbone and limbs.
Whales' bodies contain inside them connections or clues to their past. I mean, their mammalian traits are signs of their recent history, but they're also signs of a very ancient history. Take their flippers. On the outside, their flippers look like fish fins, but on the inside, the bones of that flipper are very similar to those in a monkey's arm, in the wing of a bird, and in the limb of a frog.
Egypt today seems an unlikely place for Phil Gingrich to find intermediate whale fossils.
This is Wales Valley in Egypt. You can see behind me there are many hills of sandstone standing above shale. What's important, it's called Valley of Whales because there are about 400 skeletons of whales weathering out here. This was a wide open blue sea with a full range of sea life living in it. A lot of invertebrate shellfish, sharks, about 5 or 6 kinds of whales living here.
Gingrich searches for intermediates with hind limbs and feet to trace back until those feet and hind limbs are as big and fully functional as any 4-footed animal that lives on land.
It is a Basilosaurus. Look at this. Here's the skull, incisors up front, the rest of the teeth come back to here, and in the whole length of the skull is over 1 meter.
His find, Basilosaurus, had tiny hind legs with a mobile knee and several toes, and lived 35 to 41 million years ago. Here's where scientists place this transitional form on the fossil record. The discovery of another fossil has led scientists to conclude that whales evolved from a land mammal much like this one, called Synonyx. Perhaps its descendants found the water a source of abundant food and a haven from competition. Over millions of years, through variation and selection, front legs became fins, rear legs disappeared, bodies lost fur, and took on their familiar streamlined shape.
Whales show us the sheer creative power of evolution. I mean, from a wolf-like creature to a whale in 10 or so million years is amazing.
Each dig and discovery adds more stone, more bone, more hard evidence for evolution, for the origin of life, for its history here on Earth, and for the evolutionary relationships among all forms of life. How does evolution really work?
The primary way that evolution occurs is through the action of natural selection. That is, populations change in response to environmental pressures, and they become adapted to new conditions, and they change over time.
Following Charles Darwin's lead, biologist Chris Schneider and his colleagues traveled to Ecuador to study the evolution of several animal species. This lush rainforest is a natural laboratory for ongoing investigation of evolutionary theory. Natural selection is at the core of their research on hummingbirds.
In our research, we're trying to understand how new species arise. This is Darwin's fundamental question. On the origin of species, how do new species arise? And what we're finding is that natural selection seems to be an incredibly important factor in generating new species.
Natural selection, the key evolutionary mechanism Darwin identified, is really 4 processes. Genetic variation, overproduction of offspring, struggle for existence, and differential survival and reproduction. First, genetic variation. Individuals within a species vary from one to the other. For evolution to work by natural selection, the characteristics that give an individual an advantage in a certain environment have to be passed on from one generation to the next.
And in hummingbirds, bill length seems to have a very strong genetic basis. That is, if two parents mate and both of those parents have long bills, their offspring will have long bills. If those parents have shorter bills, their offspring will have shorter bills.
Second, there is overproduction of offspring.
Darwin realized that natural selection would operate because individuals in natural populations tend to produce more offspring than can survive. For example, hummingbirds over their lifetime will often produce dozens of offspring, but only one or two of those individuals are likely to survive.
The third factor in natural selection is the struggle for existence, and that leads to differential survival and reproduction.
In any population, whether it's plants or animals or whatever, this excess production of individuals results in what Darwin called the struggle for existence. And what he had in mind there, I think, was the competition for food and space and mates as well. Hummingbirds compete for nectar. They often compete very fiercely for limited resources. Natural selection will favor individuals that are more efficient at getting nectar, and natural selection will result in changes in wing shape that allow hummingbirds to fly longer distances, for instance, or maybe to be more maneuverable, to maneuver around flowers and get nectar more efficiently. And probably most importantly, it'll affect the length and shape of the bill.
Bill measurements. In the case of hummingbirds, we know that a 1 or 2 millimeter change in length can have profound differences on how efficiently that bird feeds and how well it survives.
Individual survivors are more likely to reproduce and pass on their advantageous as well as other genes to their offspring. In an environment with long flowers, having a long bill is an advantageous trait. Not necessarily the absolute best trait always, just a better one in this environment. Hummingbirds with small bills may not survive, and eventually there will only be hummingbirds with long bills. Over a long period of time, the entire population of hummingbirds adapts to the shape and size of the flowers that exist in that environment.
If you're in the woods and you're walking with another person and you come on a bear and the bear chases you, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You only have to be faster than the other person because the bear eats them and you get away.
Species cannot develop the adaptations that benefit them in their lifetimes. Just as you cannot make your arm longer to reach a book on a shelf up high, individual small-billed hummingbirds that move into an area where there are longer flowers can't make their bills longer. Their bill length is determined by the DNA they inherited from their parents.
3.
Schneider uses hummingbird DNA sequences to reconstruct their evolutionary history as it has been shaped by natural selection. Genetic variation, overproduction of offspring, struggle for existence, and differential survival and reproduction.
We're just essentially doing what Darwin did, but with a bunch of fancy new tools. We're using molecular biology, we're using modern computational methods and all these things, but we're just doing basic natural history, really. And in the hummingbirds, we found that many of the species are relatively young. That is, they've evolved in the last 2 or 3 million years, which is pretty quick on an evolutionary timescale. Darwin emphasized over and over, I mean repeatedly in The Origin of Species, the fact that small changes would accrue every generation, and that over the enormous length of time that life has been present on Earth, these changes could build up to amount to enormous changes.
It was Charles Darwin's genius to have identified natural selection as the central force in evolution.
And I think that in research over the last 10 or 15 years has really supported that. I think most evolutionary biologists would agree that natural selection is probably the single most important force in evolution.
Did humans evolve?
John Bannister Marks.
Certainly, that's one of the most exciting insights that Darwin and others gave us, is that humans are not separate from this grand scheme of relatedness of all life on planet Earth.
In all of our distinctiveness, it can be hard to understand that we are related to even the simplest forms of life.
A researcher works with a gorilla.
Candy at all. What would you say?
For many people, it's even difficult to accept our close evolutionary relationship to other primates. Part of the problem in understanding our relationship to other living primates is to look at the difference between a relative and an ancestor. Look at your own relatives. Here's you and your biological mother and father. You are related to them and descended from them. Your mother's sister is your aunt, and her child your first cousin. You are related to them, but you are not descended from them. When you look back at generations before you, you can see your ancestors. You and your cousin share two, very close in this case, common ancestors, your maternal grandmother and grandfather. If you keep looking back at your ancestors for about 5 million years, you will arrive at the common ancestor we share with today's apes.
Anthropologist Don Johansson.
We didn't evolve from chimpanzees, but the common ancestor to both of these had a skeleton that was pretty similar to what we see in a chimpanzee. It got around on all fours. But through the years, with evolutionary changes, this skeleton, the skeleton of a four-legged creature, was modified for a different kind of locomotion, a different way of getting around.
These differences may look great, but at the genetic level, the differences are minimal, as Dr. David Page's research demonstrates.
In the last few decades, we've seen a completely new kind of evidence emerge that demonstrates unequivocally the close relationship between humans and chimps. And that evidence has come from DNA.
Page pulls a wand covered with white substance from a vial.
This is DNA. We've got DNA, chimps have got DNA, bacteria have got DNA, petunias have got DNA, crabs have got DNA. Every living animal, plant, fish, frog has got DNA. And if we compare the DNAs of any two species, we can establish how closely related they are one to another.
The sequence of the 4 chemical building blocks of DNA determines the traits of all living things. These are represented by A's, T's, C's, and G's. Each generation passes on this chemical text to its offspring. Occasional mistakes in copying, mutations, can result in new traits. Page takes part of a gene in humans and aligns it with the corresponding sequence of the same gene found in chimps to compare the letters.
And what we see is that these two sequences, the human and chimp sequences, are spectacularly similar. They are, in fact, 98% identical. There are just a couple of spelling changes. Why are there only a couple of spelling changes? Because we and chimps had a common ancestor only a few million years ago. If more time had passed since we had our last common ancestor, more spelling changes would have accumulated.
To make that point, Page shows the same gene sequence of a mammal that is very different from humans, the rat.
You see that there are far more differences, let's say, between the human and the rat than between the human and the chimp. That's because our common ancestor with the rat lived about 80 or 100 million years ago, and there's been much more time for spelling differences to accumulate.
A chart shows rows of letters representing the DNA sequences of the 3 species.
We've learned that in primates, DNA sequences are changing at a rate of about 1% every 3 million years. In other words, about 5 million years ago, the precursor of humans and chimps lived. And we can see that. We can, in a sense, read that right out of the DNA sequences. In the 19th century, in Darwin's time, it was audacious to claim that humans and chimps were closely related. There wasn't that much scientific evidence. But in the 20th century, we've seen the fossil record emerge.
An animated graphic shows a tree limb with an ape at the bottom and branches leading to a chimp and a human-like creature.
In the 21st century, the combination of fossil record, physical features, and molecular evidence leaves no doubt that humans and apes shared a common ancestor several million years ago. And humans and apes, like those early primates, have continued to evolve ever since.
In computer animation, the human-like creature walks away.
Why does evolution matter now?
Evolution matters now because it happens every day in our lives. A perfect example for looking at this is in sicknesses which are caused by microbes. Microbes are small particles that are able to cause disease in human beings. They include things such as bacteria, viruses, mycobacteria, fungi. And their evolutionary world in which they try to survive is inside the human being.
Viruses, bacteria, and other microbes may be all but invisible to us, but that doesn't mean we don't play a huge role in their evolution. The way we use antibiotics, for instance, has a lot to do with which ones survive, the helpful ones or the harmful ones. Tuberculosis, the leading infectious killer of adults in the world today, is caused by bacteria. And it has become one of the most lethal, especially in Russia, where evolution on a cellular level has resulted in some tuberculosis bacteria that are resistant to drugs, threatening the survival of hundreds of thousands. This is ground zero of a global tuberculosis epidemic. Russia's crowded prisons provide a perfect breeding ground for the transmission of tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis is spread through the air and is therefore a very threatening disease in that someone could cough and a few hours later someone walking into that room could inhale the air and become sick with tuberculosis.
People who do become sick with tuberculosis develop a cough and fever and begin losing a lot of weight.
If you look at the X-ray of the healthy lung, what you see is a lot of dark areas within the lung. That's because the lung is primarily composed of air, and that indicates that there's a healthy lung. When you look at the tuberculosis lung, you can see that there are many white areas. What's in there is a lot of phlegm and blood and pus. The person is constantly coughing this up when they cough, and it's a sign that the person is quite ill.
Like Dr. Jennifer Furin, microbiologist Alex Goldfarb is one of the many health professionals who travels from the United States to Russia to combat multi-drug resistant TB.
Every one of you has been diagnosed with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. In other words, the type of tuberculosis that you have does not respond to regular medications.
When people are sick with tuberculosis, we often need to give them more than one medication in order to kill all of the bacteria that are living within inside that person.
Treatment begins with one medication. The antibiotic kills many of the bacteria. A second dose of the antibiotic kills off even more bacteria, but still some remain alive, resistant to the antibiotic. If the patient does not take all the prescribed antibiotics, these resistant bacteria multiply and pass their resistance to their descendants, and the patient remains sick. In this way, a strain of bacteria evolves to become fully resistant to an antibiotic.
And the same cycle can continue until the person is resistant to all the medications that we use to treat tuberculosis.
It's a classic example of natural selection. Genetic variation within bacteria strains allows some bacteria to survive even when hit with antibiotics. These surviving bacteria are selected and continue to evolve. That is, survive and reproduce over time, unless treatment is thorough. A single bacterium can reproduce 1 million times in a single human lifespan.
It would be impossible for me to do my work with the sufferers of TB without understanding how evolution works, because evolution is key in how we treat and understand the disease.
So why should we be concerned about how evolution happens in a prison halfway around the world?
Globalization is not just, financial markets or the information space which became global. The bacterial ecology has also been globalized.
We recently heard about a gentleman in Russia who was very sick with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, and treatment was not available for him in Russia at the time. He boarded an airplane and flew from Moscow to New York City, went straight to a hospital there to get treatment for his multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. But in the setting of being on the airplane, he had coughed, the airs recirculated, and 34 people were infected with tuberculosis on that one airplane flight.
In the United States, about 10 to 15 million Americans are infected with TB bacteria, and at least 1 million are expected to develop the disease. Evolution matters now because what happens to bacteria in a Russian prison can happen closer to home, as we use antibiotics in our doctor's offices, clinics, and hospitals. Our very survival depends on our understanding of evolution.